Today is July 12th, 2017. I'm Joann Small, and my husband and I, William, are here with Bill Biggs as part of the Coastal Voices Project. Bill, thank you for letting us in your Southern Shores home to visit with your wife, Jerry. I know you have deep Dare County roots. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I'll be 78 in 6 months, and I've been here all my life. The only time I ever left was the Army, 2 years in the Army. I was in Germany. The rest of the time, generally, I've been here. I was in a few years in the driver's license as an examiner in Elizabeth City and Morehead City, but other than that, I've been right here. So yeah, I can go back a little ways.
What about your ancestors in Dare County?
Well, the ancestors in Dare County were the Wards and Westcotts. And so my great-grandfather was Wellington Ward, and he came here from Bertie County in the early 1800s and married Sarah Etheridge, which was part of the Etheridge family farm that's over on Manteo, that was the daughter of, and so my granddaddy's grandmother was Sarah Etheridge. And then his daddy, my granddaddy's daddy, was John Ward, who was actually a keeper at the Body Island Lighthouse for a while. He was also a magistrate, and I have his law book, Session Law of 1899, upstairs, signed by him. He was also the first postmaster in Nags Head. This was John Ward. This was my granddaddy's daddy. So then I was very close with my grandfather, who was Otho Carteret Ward, and very close. He died in 1958. He was 80 years old. And he was a hunter, and I hunted with him. And so, that's, I go back, and they were married into the Westcott family. So we were real close with the Westcotts, Manteo Westcotts and the Wards. They were also the Printing Times Meekins. We were married, and through marriage, kin to them somehow. Those old people claim kin, and I'm sorry I didn't get more of it written down in the family tree, but anyway, I go back pretty good long ways on that side. Now, Dad was not from here; he was from over Roper, and Dad came down here with the CCC in the Depression, and married my mother, Leslie Ward. So, and this is interesting let me back up a little bit about my granddad. I'm quite proud about this. He was at the Kill Devil Hill Station when the Wrights flew. He was a young man, but his uncle Jesse Ward was captain of the station. So they were involved with the Wrights because his uncle Jesse was the man that allowed them to go over there and help the Wrights. And I remember we had to carry Papa to that celebration every year on the 17th. He actually had a piece of the plane, or I don't think they were actually pieces of the plane. They were just wood they had used. It. They had signed their name, burnt their name in with a pencil, with a hot pencil. And I don't know what happened with that. I think it's in the Roanoke Island Historical. But he remembered talking about the Wright brothers and their personality. One of them was real quiet. One of them was more open, and he thought that, as did many, that they were over there flying kites, and they didn't think it would ever go anywhere. And then bang, when they put the motor on it, got it to fly, and they became famous overnight. And then, but I was quite proud to hear him, to get that firsthand. Right. He had actually carried one of them to Manteo. There's a lady, an Etheridge lady over there that did the sewing for him, and he'd actually carried one of them over there a couple of times to check on, get the thing sewed or check on it, see if it was ready. But I was pretty close to him, and so we had you don't there were some, I think the second wife that that old man John Ward, my great granddaddy, married, his first wife died, he married a Tillage. So see that it was somehow there was Westcott's, Tillage. You know, it was an isolated island. I don't think there was any intermarrying that much, but there was. If you look back at the family tree, and I have a couple of them, those names appear the big Daniels family at Wanchese. Their mother was a Ward. She was my granddaddy's would be my granddaddy's aunt, I think. Mm-hmm. So the Ward name, Alva Ward, who started the ice plant, who was an advocate for Alva Jr. still living. They were all in that same family. And a few years ago, a group of young people, young Wards from Norfolk area and Richmond, decided to have Ward reunions, and they were popping up from all over. A lot of them had ended up in the Norfolk area through the years. And there was a family that you don't even hear about on my grandmother's side. This is Otho Cartwright. It was my grandmother named Lester. And that was, I think, was probably 15 of them lived in Manteo. The old man Lester came in on a shipwreck. Okay, sailboat wreck up here somewhere, and they, for some reason, all moved up in the Norfolk area for jobs, which leads to Dare County being a very poor place.
Right.
And there was no farming here, no mills. It was fishing back in those days. And even as a young man, it was still quite poor. We didn't know it, but per capita income was probably pretty low. So that's my roots are Wards, Lesters who are no longer here, and yeah, there's Daniels in the family, Tillage, Etheridge's to start off with. Wellington was the first Ward here, and he was from Bertie County.
And what about you? Where were you born?
Born in Manteo, and believe it or not, there was a midwife, a lady named Etta Peel, that had a place down in Manteo. And when my mama went to have me, which was 23rd of December, the old doctor, which was Dr. Johnson, was in a blind in Kitty Hawk Bay, and they called him. They called him, and the time he got there, I'd been born by the midwife. So things, changed a little bit. But all of us, I think, I have a brother that was 18 months older than me. He was born in the same place. My sister is 8 years younger than me, and she was born in Manteo.
Did you grow up?
Grew up in Manteo.
Right in Manteo.
Right up in what they call the north end of Manteo. About a mile north of the cemetery. In fact, the old home is still standing there, and I don't know the names of the new streets, all the lot they're named after Indian names, but the old home that I was born and raised in is still there. It's a big 2-story, nice house. It was living really good, but for the time, a big house, and it sits right close to Manteo High School, just northwest of Manteo High School. But anyway, that's where I was born and raised. Stayed there until I went in the Army. And
so, what about cousins, relatives that you keep up with still that are living in Manteo? Do you have?
Oh Lord, I've got some relatives. I've got a daughter who lives over there, and grandchildren, and also a sister, and she has a daughter living in Manteo and a son in Wanchese. So there's still a bunch of them there, and I have a cousin Westcott that I was very close to growing up living in Camden, but he owns and maintains his old home place in Manteo. and his brother, which is the other cousin, just moved back to Manteo. So, let me think about it. I think a lot of them passed on. So, but that's about it. They're distant cousins probably that I don't keep up with it. There was a family of Tillets that were, my first cousin was their mother. I don't keep up with them that much. Some of them live at Wanchese. So,
What are your memories of growing up in Manteo, like going to school and?
Well, I graduated in '58, okay, and the biggest class that ever graduated from Manteo High School, I think it was 38, if my memory serves me. So, but it was a laid-back place. See, it was no class-minded. There was hardly any class. You didn't realize who had all the money, It was a unique situation, a great place to grow up. As far as there were probably many places like that on the coast, but I remember nobody locked their doors, and Daddy didn't even take the key out of his car, and until way later, and the crime over there was somebody being drunk, disorderly. You never heard of a killing, and it was, my uncle was I had an uncle named Kenneth Ward. You probably knew his daughter Diana Ramsey. You knew her, so she's my first cousin.
Right.
I was sort of the son he never had. Didn't realize it at the time, but he made a lot of me, and so he had a charter boat, and that he ran out of Dykes Fishing Center. That's where it all started. He also had, and you may find this interesting, the Lone Cedar Club, which was a hunting club, the only building on the causeway, which was across from Mark Basnight's restaurant. It was the only building on the whole causeway. It was called the Lone Cedar Hunting Club. He owned that. He obtained it from a guy named Tull Lemon. And this was right after the war. So I grew up fishing on that boat with him. We went over and mowed the yard of the Lone Cedar when I was probably 10, 11 years old. Fished, soft crab, and just waiting until I'd get old enough to get on that charter boat. And then he sold. I got to tell you this because it's part of I've had a really influence on my childhood. I loved charter fishing, but I had a problem with it. I got seasick. So he would buy Dramamine, and he was so insistent on me going with him because he wanted, I guess he loved me, wanted to train me. And I'd be steering that boat, the boats were slow then, they were displacement hull. I'd be steering that boat, I can remember going trying to sleep, falling backwards, had a cushion. And things, and so I was not the best mate by any means, but I stuck with it till I outgrew that feeling. By then it was almost too old. But he not only did he have a charter boat, but he had that duck hunting at the Lone Cedar all at the same time. And that's where I was introduced, I'd go over there and sit in the blind, and I was too young to shoot a gun. I'd watch the old people shoot, okay, and I got thinking, man, if I ever get old enough to do that, that's what I'm gonna, I'm gonna love it. And then as a few years passed, and I think the federal law discouraged him from the duck hunting because they were starting to close blinds. I remember he went out one time and had a federal notice in his blind that bait had been found. He said, it's time to quit, time to get out of this. So his wife's home place was a big, nice 2-story house at East Lake. It was the Murray Sawyer. She was sister to the Sawyers that had the Ford company over in Manteo. Anyway, they let him use that for a lodge, a hunting lodge, okay? So I transitioned from duck hunting at the Lone Cedar to the old Murray Sawyer Club, and I helped him with his deer bear hunting in the fall, and he gave me a little bit of money, and most of the kids in my class when we graduated all couldn't wait to go to college, and I couldn't wait to go full time and help Uncle Kent up, and he encouraged it, which that was good or bad. Looking back at it, it happened, and that's the way it was. And I helped him till I was, I'm thinking probably a couple of years out of school, 20 years old, and I helped him with those parties, and they deer hunted with dogs, which I never did like, but it was a source of income for him to help. And they bear hunted, and at night on Milltail Creek, and it was legal. They claimed they were coon hunting, and the game wardens, they had the blessings of the game wardens, and even the sheriff would go over there and hunt with him. Frank Cahoon was the sheriff. Believe it or not, Andy Griffith went over there in later years and hunted with us. Cedar played his guitar and joked. So I'm rambling a little bit, but this is, I'm telling you about my childhood, you know, how I got into it. He even had a float blind, and I had tried to encourage him to expand his duck hunting again, because there was, you know, the season lasted longer, there was more money. So he had, my granddaddy built him a float blind, and they carried it out on the Great Shoal, which is Mouth Alligator River. That was the last of the commercial guiding he did for waterfowl, and somebody stole his float blind. But I did get a chance to hunt out there one time, and helped him put some corn out around it one time. But anyway, it was so hunting. Because of him, and my granddaddy was right involved in all of it, so I sort of was the hunter. I couldn't get it out of my blood. It was almost like a disease.
Part of your heritage.
Well, yeah, I loved it. I loved it, and most of all, the waterfowl part of it. I went along with the bear hunting and the deer hunting just to help out, because my granddaddy loved it, and Kenneth was making a little money off of it. So I went along with that and almost worked for nothing. He paid me a little something, and it was that probably was by the time I was getting too old to really be in it, I should have been getting away from it a little bit. He started building a boat for a gentleman from Elizabeth City named Walter Davis. So they said, you can drive a nail pretty good. You want to go up there and help build that boat? And so they hired these old guys that had built boats, shad boats, and way back, the old time, they had one modern builder there that came to work with his skill saw and his jigsaw and everything, and the rest of them were used to using hand saws and doing all of it. And so I guess they wanted it. Kenneth we had got to know Walter because he fished. He used to book the old Cherokee down in Oregon County for 2 weeks at a time and bring the whole family. So we got to know him real well. And he said, I just want this boat built good and the best you can have it built.
Is that the first Jermel?
That was the first Jermel I helped build it. And then I'd already had a draft notice that this was in the spring of '62. Now, by then, we're talking about, I'll give you 20 years of history here. But in the spring of '62, they launched the Jermel, and I went on there as mate with Ken. And that was at the time the fastest boat. It would get up. A lot of them were still displacement hull, about 2/3 of them. And this boat would get up and run. It had 2 diesel engines, and it was. But looking back, it was not a real pretty boat, but it did have some flair, and it had a good bottom, and it was a nice boat for its time. And I had a chance to fish with Wimpy Lassiter, get to know him real well. And it was an experience. And
he was the pool shark, right?
huh?
He was the
Pool shark. He
Yeah.
was indeed, and And of course, I got to know Mr. Davis pretty good. He was always good to me. And you know, a lad that was used to working for maybe at best a $10 tip, when a man would shake hands at the end of the trip and give you $100 bill, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And it really, at that time, you know, it was, I was making more money than my brother who had a college education. So, but you know, for a short period of time. And
Who ran that boat? Was that
Kenneth Ward, the same one, Diana's dad, Diana Ramsey's dad. He was the one I'm talking about throughout, Kenneth Ward. He was
That was your Uncle Ken.
Uncle Ken, yeah. And throughout all of this, Dad sort of was the innocent bystander. He would go fishing and hunting some with us, but he was an insurance man. He would, I think I was goading him in that I didn't go to school. I wish I'd have now, looking back, and maybe listened to Dad a little bit more than I did Uncle Ken, but it was a fun, glamorous thing to do, you know. Yeah. We went fishing one time. There was another boat similar to the first Jermel named the Ollie V. It was a guy from Virginia Beach who was a rich real estate man, and he had been down to Florida and had Johnny Rivovich build a boat which was a little bit faster than the Jermel. And they were very competitive. And so Mr. Davis arranged this. Now this was a trip. He had Luther Hodges, Terry Sanford, Governor Terry Sanford, Luther Hodges, which was at the time in Washington. He was the Commerce Secretary. Okay, there was Governor Welch from Indiana. Our Congressman Bonner, Herbert Bonner, and the governor of Texas was supposed to go. Something come up at last. He was down here, but he was not able to go. But think about that. And I was waiting for that. So they divided up to, part of them went on the Ollie V and part of them on the Jermel. So Kenneth said, you know, we're lucky. The wind's really blowing hard, and this Jermel will hold up. We can run it in the corner, and he will not be able to keep up with us because it'll beat that old thing to pieces. It don't have the timbers in it that these guys put in. And that was right funny. That actually happened. We were right there fishing, you know, 30 minutes before this. So they were very competitive, and it was kind of funny. Davis loved that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He liked to, you know, he'd puff that OC on, and he'd say, run this thing wide and put her in the corner. You know, but I had a lot of fun. And Wimpy was called the port captain because he got seasick, really bad seasick, and I had been there. You know, I said, man, I can, you know, you need to just stay ashore if you're going to go out there and feel like I feel. Well, it's not hardly worth it, I guarantee you. So he would stay on shore, but he would tell me all the stories about pool sharking and get back some pretty rugged times. You know. And but anyway, I had a happy childhood, and then bang, here comes the Army, and I'm in Germany, and it put a foot in my butt, and I grew up some while I was in there, and I come back and I said, you know, I got to get in gear, you know, I keep, you know, times, you know, so, and I got married, and you know, all that was, and Uncle Ken was close to me. He died in the early 60s. I think probably 64. But that was my, you know, growing up in Manteo was let me go back a little bit and tell you some experiences in Manteo. I'd be riding my bike down to get a haircut or go to the little hardware store, and I can remember some old lady saying, Billy, honey, I didn't see your mother in church Sunday. Is she all right? I'd say, well, they went to Norfolk to see Aunt so-and-so. But that was the kind of, they all knew, everybody knew one another. And they knew everybody's business. Some of it was not so good, of course. But I was raised in the Baptist church. There was a Methodist church in Manteo and a Baptist church. And if the door opened on that church, I had to be there. But don't let a revival come to town. but it was a different place. And some things that stand out in my memory, really, I'm not following your question, I'm just going to ramble a little bit and you can edit it. But some things that really stand out in my memory that were interesting was that there really, I remember, I'm going to go back in the beginning, I can actually remember going out on my granddad's back porch and hearing the earth shake and seeing the glow of ships being torpedoed off here. And that stuck in my memory. I was born in 39, so this was probably, could have been 45. They were still sinking those boats out there, and they were running in mines in some cases. And they had blackouts that they made everybody turn their lights off, and they had tapes they put across the headlights of the cars. I remember that well. And I can remember the war, they had tokens, to buy, you couldn't get this and that and the other. Everything was short. You couldn't get automobile tires. There was Coast Guard stations every 7 miles, and of course they were very active, and you would hear different members of the family were involved. In fact, Dad was in the Navy. The uncle I just talked about was in the Navy. He ran a crash boat, and they had an airport. The airport at Manteo was built by the Navy. Okay, and he ran the crash boat over there. Dad was stationed there, and Uncle Roy King, who married my mother's sister, that lived next door to me, and so they had stars that you hung up. A flag was a star if family members were in the service. And Uncle John, who was in the Army, he was overseas, actually wasn't in Normandy, and I think it messed him up. But, so we had 4 stars hanging in Wyndham. So they were all, involved in the war effort. And the commander of the air base was a guy named Creelan. And he liked my family. I hope those guys must have done a good job or something, but he'd come there to eat on weekends. And he was actually a pilot. And I can remember as a young man going out there, and he had a seaplane called a Widgeon. Okay, and they'd set me up in a seat and let me play with the controls. I was just a little old fella. And those planes were crashing all the time, and it was big news. And we'd go to look at, like I remember one off the Mother Vineyard, it crashed on the reef. The pilot was okay, and there was a spit of sand up near the Lost Colony, one that actually landed his plane, and he was all right. But the wing fell off of one coming in for a landing that was a TBM, which had 3 people on it, and it killed all of them, and it killed a black boy that was picking blueberries. That was so some horror stories along with it. A lot of them crashed and didn't survive, of course, because they think they were. But that was a big talk, and to go watch the planes land and hear them and watch them, and I knew all of them by what they were, F4Us, F6Fs, the ones from Elizabeth City, the seaplanes that came down, they were part of the rescue efforts. But the war was very close. People that's a part of history that's passed by here. People don't really realize that. And the tourist thing didn't really start getting kicked off till after the war. I mean, it was big, The first of it was down at Nags Head by Jockey's Ridge, was Eden and Elizabeth City people that built down there. And that's because there was a dock there, and the mail boat, the freight boat came in there, see. So that was the beginning of this beach, tourist stuff. And it was really rolling by the late 50s. I mean, there was, houses were being built everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we were on the map, thanks to Acock Brown and a few, they realized what they had here, and it's time to kick it off and get the people here. And at about that same time, they invited the Park Service in, and a lot of land was almost given to them.
What about Billy Brown? Were y'all?
He was my best friend growing up.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
him
most-
and Johnny Booth. There's a picture of me in his book, Mullet Roar. But we kind of grew apart later on a little bit. We had some difference of opinion, but as boys growing up, we were just like that. Duck hunting, duck hunting, duck hunting. It was a big thing. And he party fished, and they tied up right across. He was on a boat called the Phyllis May, which had the only black captain down there. And my uncle was really close friends with, and encouraged that black man to move down to Oregon on it when they moved to the fishing center, and was a lifelong friend, very close to him. You know, he said, "Don't let he said, don't let your."
You spoke earlier about the original fishing center. Where was that?
At Dykes, it was right where the ramp is now, where the wildlife ramp is now. A canal ran all the way up, and they a guy named George Dykester had he had obtained. There was a small fishing center there by a guy named Rogers earlier on, but when Dykester got it, he promoted the charter fishing, and he booked a lot of parties there, and that's where it all started. And I'm trying to think when they moved down to Oregon Inlet. I couldn't be accurate on that, but it's very early 50s, if not before that. And Toby Tilley, the guy that ran the ferry across there, owned the land, and he started the first fishing center. He built a house and started building docks, and of course it was so much closer then. They all migrated down there. In just a few years, they were all down there. But it was. You couldn't look at the place now and even tell where Dykester's house was, but he had quite a business there.
What about, you were talking about your duck hunting in those early years when you were young. What about your decoys? How are they different, or have they not changed?
Oh yeah, my granddaddy made a lot of the decoys. They made them out of the geese out of canvas, wire and canvas, and he chopped the things out. He was never quite as particular as some of the Currituck makers. His were made to last, and I inherited all the decoys from the Lone Cedar, actually. And my cousin Westcott, William Westcott, was himself a very good carver. He's almost an artist, and he would take and redo a lot of the canvas decoys. And a lot of the ducks, they were all the solid wooden cedar blocks. And the bills had been broken off a lot of them, the heads a lot of them. So my brother and I at the direction of my granddad, put a lot of heads back on. They were diver stand, and but they were so heavy you couldn't, you could not. You load a boat down with them, but it's probably in the early 50s they started coming out with lighter decoys, which you might remember some paper decoys, some molded paper, right? And then fiberglass later on, and when they started mass producing fiberglass, that was it. Everybody got rid of the wood. I would have had $1 million worth of decoys had I saved them. I didn't know they'd ever be worth anything, and they were heavy. And we started out with, waterfowling was there was never the clubs that there was in Currituck here. There was the Goose Wing, the Duck Island, the Lone Cedar was probably one of the last ones. And there was some down at Hatteras, one or two, but it seemed like the fishing was better down here, the commercial end of it. So people, rather than just depend on that, they wanted to hunt during hunting season and be done with it and get their nets in the sand because it was lucrative. But the decoys were. I still have some decoys that I recovered that were from that era, and they're heavy. But They worked, and we did use the old canvas geese. Some of the ones that I inherited from the Lone Cedar were not ones my granddad had made. By then, he'd had some Mamie Haywoods. He had some decoys that I remember Mamie Haywood because he was in Kitty Hawk, and he made a light decoy. And I remember he had quite a few of those. And we John T. Etheridge, a guy in North End, made the prettiest ones. He made some for kennels that were beautiful, and I wish I had kept some of them, and I didn't. And they were made light, and they were all made out of juniper. But the ducks, good Lord knows where they were from all over. They were all cedar blocks. They were heavy, and you couldn't dream. One of the best places to hunt was Nags Head Flats, which was quite a walk because the road that you travel on, NC-12, was not there. It was all the old beach road, the ocean road. So to walk out in that marsh from there, you were talking about thousands of yards, and to carry those decoys was impossible. So what some of them would do with early in the season, they would take them in there and leave them, and you know how that would work. They'd start disappearing. So we hunted. We mostly hunted in the Sound because of that. We didn't want to take decoys, and we had a 16-foot skiff my granddaddy had built. He built skiffs for other people, and he built actually 5 skiffs for the Lone Cedar operation. One of them was a big boat. So I inherited, my brother and myself inherited one of those, and had an air-cooled engine in it, and that was, we pulled a skiff for decoys, and that was what we hunted. We built a lump down in, which was a box buried down in the sand. We piled turf up around it. It would grow. It was a man-made island, and it was really very effective. It was really good hunting. Killed a lot of puddle ducks, and then that we hunted in one place, one lump, and I think we cut away part of Roanoke Island and carried it over there and put it around that box. They wouldn't no more allowed that night.
No.
They'd be in jail if you cut that turf. We called it turf. And we had a place that was a nice island. I mean, ducks would come right in, you know, but that's, the decoys, when the light decoys came out, particularly the herder styrofoam, that was it. All the wooden decoys went. We give them away. I don't know. I gave a bunch of them to a guy that was hunting down on Mount Mosquito guy, and he said he'd love to have them, and he tried to pay me $20 for 2 dozen. I said, no, they're yours. I gave them away. Russell Berry was his name. Gave them to him. He left them in the blind down there, see, and it worked out all right. But those decoys were an art that you know, the ones around here that were really good at it, there was a guy at Wanchese that did good work, Mr. Cliff, I think Cliff Tillett. He cut out a lot of decoys for Duck Island, and a couple others that don't come to mind. A lot of them like down here were like my granddad. They'd take a hatchet and cut one out and put a fair head on it, but they didn't take time to. The first decoys I owned way back, right during that era when there was a Lone Cedar Club, we had permission to hunt the shore and the marshes adjacent to where we lived, which was Baum's Point. It's now a big development, another vineyard. The house was a big vineyard, great. There was acres and acres of vineyard, and on one side there was a dairy, and it's all owned by one family, and they were real close friends with my granddaddy. We had to run of the place, okay, so I could walk up a lane for about a mile and come to the sign, and then walk south, and there was the point that forms the north end of Shadowback Bay called Baum's Point. It's a great place to hunt for a kid. And we'd keep seeing these geese. There were blinds on the reef, which was offshore, and they shot out there. It was a great place. And we would wait for the 1 or 2 stormy times when they would come ashore, but we didn't have decoys. We just sat on that point and honk. We could honk just like geese trying to call them. Well, you know about what that was. So my daddy bought 3 goose decoys from a Mr. Stowe from Hatteras that had moved to Manteo and made decoys. And they were really a collector's item now. They were a very short neck decoy he made a lot of them for Gulf Shoal Island. But Dad bought 3 of them, and I think he paid him $4 a piece for them. And that was the first decoy. We put those 3 decoys out, and we had some old broken duck decoys that we fashioned heads ourselves. That was first my duck hunting on ourselves, you know. And I had a bolt action 20 gauge, and the boy and Tom had we had 2 bolt action 20 gauges, and the older cousin had a double barrel Harrington Richards that had tar tape electrical tape. Right, it hold it together. Now here we were, and you know, and I killed my first goose. People say, "What were your daddy letting you do with a gun that early?" Well, I had borrowed the gun from my brother. I was only 12 years old to kill my first goose, and I was hooked.
Yeah.
For life. And the goose was almost all I could do to pick him up. And then we would average shooting maybe 2 geese a year. That was because, you know, we were
Right.
making do. We shot some ducks we did kill a few canvasbacks, which we were very proud of, but mostly what we were shooting were bufflehead. Mm-hmm. The fish ducks. we did bait. We were told not to. See, my daddy says, you know, you're not going to bait because I can't afford to pay you a fine. So if I catch you baiting, those guns are locked up. But for the older people that were doing the guide and everything, they did. And I can remember, and this is you'll appreciate this story, a bunch of young lads. Now, I was 15 by then. Tom had a driver's license. There was a guy named Merle Meekins who probably was about, maybe he was 16. We went to this place at Baum's Point, one snowy, hard northeast. We knew the wind was right for those geese to be in there, and we were going to go down there and jump shoot them. And it was deep water off on the Manteo side. You had to wait till the fowl jumped and fly upwind and shoot them in order to wait out and get a shallow on the east side, really deep on the west side. So there must have been 50 geese and swan mixed had got in there on that point. And we just flock shot them when they got off in front of us. And the only damn thing that fell out was a swan. Okay? And it was it was known $500 fine shooting a swan. It was a no-no. So we said, well, what are we going to do with the swan? So Merle and Tom said, well, we got to carry him home and eat him. We were taught, you shot it, you ate it. We can't throw it away. It's a big old swan thing, must have weighed 30 pounds. So we carried it home, and we said, well, if we get busy and pick it, stopped on the way home, and by then it was getting dark. Picked, all 3 of us picked. And said, by then, Dad and Mom had gone to a movie. We said, listen, let's grab the newspaper and go out on the back porch and gut this thing and singe it, and Dad will never know this from a goose. We'll just tell him it's a goose. Not know it. Well, it's the only time I've ever never known them coming home before the end of a movie. The movie was so sorry that they came in the middle of the movie, and there we were with a swan with a head still on it, taking, finishing it up on his Ledger Dispatch, his nightly paper that he looked forward to all day. He took 2 papers. And you talk about hitting the fan and hit the fan. He said, the guns are locked in the closet. He said, if one of you take it out, I'll wrap the barrel around a tree. I'll never forget that. And Merle Meekins, which was one of the Avon family, said, I believe it's time for me to leave. he got out of there. But I mean, that's the type. I just tell that for a memory. He was telling us right.
Yeah.
But it was
your first swan.
He said you should have not shot in that flock. put Swan in there. You should have known better. We should have.
Right.
Boys will be boys.
Yeah.
Anyway. Question.
Earlier, you said something about going to Hatteras Island, or did you? I know Roanoke Island was fairly isolated. You came over to the beach some. You went to East Lake some. Did you go to Hatteras Island?
Well, as ferries, the only way in my time, the Carrie's Bridge was open, and of course we would go Norfolk or Elizabeth City with little trouble. Dad's folks lived in Roper. Can you imagine having to go across two ferries to get to Roper? We had Mans Harbor Ferry and Alligator River Ferry. If you wanted to go to Greenville somewhere, you had one ferry, and then you could go down 260 foot through Englehart and go that way. But Hatteras, the ferry across the Oregon Inland, I would go. I didn't. Rode Anthony maybe once in a while. For some reason or other, but I never, in my early years, I didn't go to Hatteras. I remember going in, the sea got real rough one time, and we were down off of the lightship fishing, and which the lightship, that tower is where the end diamond shows, and well, they got wind breeze up here hard in the northeast, and my uncle decided that he would go in Hatteras Inlet, and we spent the night, and I got to know, I knew a lot of people because there were a lot of Hatteras people that moved to Manteo. So we knew, we were all, but I didn't until later years, and then in late years, I actually worked with the Park Service and worked with them in Hatteras at Buxton. And,
You knew Captain Ellery.
well, see, he built a house on Mother Vineyard Road, and that was not far from where I was born and raised.
You knew him and Manny.
And they called him Ellery Clark. I don't know if it's Ellery Clark Midget, I guess. But my memory of him was he was quite a character. He retired and actually ran a ferry for a while. He was a ferry captain. And my late memories of Ellery was when I was in fisheries, was probably in the 80s. He had remarried, by then was living in Collington Harbor, and he wanted some of the Collington people were setting nets in those canals, and he didn't want them in there, and they shouldn't have been in there, but there was no law at the time against it, so the fishers had a meeting out at the aquarium, public hearing, and one of the topics was to remove the gill nets out of the ditches in Collins and the canals. So Ellery got up and said that, these damn nets don't need to be set in this canal, or there's got to be a law against it. And he said his piece, and he said, if any of you here want to argue, and I've heard one man booing back here, said, meet me out back and we'll settle it. Now, here's a man that we had to be close to 80 years old. He said, meet me out back and we'll settle it. I thought, that guy, that's
good.
He was a character. But I didn't know him as good as, well, Uncle Ken, and so, but I was never around him that much, except when he owned that boat in Collin. I had to go out there and tell him about the law a little bit, He was not the easiest man to get along with in the world. If you sit on the opposite side of the fence, which I didn't, I was trying to be neutral. And they did finally pass a law to make those boys take.
And what was your job at that time?
See, I was enforcement with fishers. I was inspector with fishers, 25 years. But that was my knowledge of Ellery was in his later years. He had a big boat, but he was a known character. He was kin to the people that had the Seafair restaurant. They were all
Haymans.
the Haymans. They were all kin.
Yeah.
But he did quite well. I think he was maybe he did make captain.
Mike Heyman kept his boat back there for a while.
Mike came, had his boat in there for a while. Yeah. But that was about early on. I can remember my granddaddy had about an acre and a half garden that And in the summer, he would tell me to take some of his vegetables, and he'd take a tow sack and where I could carry it over my bicycle bars and go sell vegetables. He said he'd pick them, put them in sacks, and that'd be your big way to make some money for you. And Elroy, I'd go up there, and A.Q. Bell lived next door. They'd buy some vegetables. He was on my right, and he'd buy vegetables from me. This is the times he was there. And he had a brother that lived next door to him for a while, and who had a son that was a good friend of mine. I can't remember the brother's name, but anyway, and then back on the bicycle ride, I'd go on up. The Lost Colony people lived in that area. Eddie Green and he used to always buy some vegetables from me. Mr. Long, who was involved with the Lost Colony forever, he was one of the better customers. And even Andy would be up there sometime. They'd always want to know, could I get a watermelon up there? I said, no, but you can go down to my granddaddy's and buy one. I can't carry a watermelon. I knew Elroy as a very young man, but had dealings with him as when he was quite old. He could. I liked the fact that he'd stand. He'd tell you where he'd let you know what he wanted.
Well, getting back to you and some of those good friends you had growing up, did y'all come over to the casino? Nags Head?
Yeah, much against my mother's will. She used to say she wished it burned down. It'd be the best thing ever happened. But the casino, there was 2 stops when I was a young man. I hate to go back, but there was you could get a bag of beer put out the back door of the Toot and Tell It, which later on became the Drafty. And you could stop there for a beer, and then go on and they let me in actually free at the casino. Rass Westcott, they all knew me, knew my folks, and they'd stamp me and let me in free. But yeah, that was any young person that grew up around here. It was like a homecoming to go to the casino, see everybody ever knew. And he had good bands. Early on, in the Pirates Jamboree days, when I first started going there, they had I heard Louie Armstrong, and was there for the whole thing, and Fats Domino later on, but many bands you'd recognize that he had really good music, and generally it was a nice place. There was white linen cloths on the tables, and they had guys in white coats going around serving. And you could carry a bag in there with your liquor, but so you buy the setups. And of course, he sold beer. And it was generally, it had a bad name at times. Before I started going over there during the war, I think fisticuffs were just about a nightly thing because of all the sailors that were around and everything. They were all, doing what sailors and Marines do, get run fighting. But in my time, I didn't see many fights. It was just a pretty good place to go dance. And I was even after the Army, I got in the Army in '63, even was back over there a couple of times. But by then, my crowd, the ones I had, was a younger group. And I don't remember when it closed up, but it would have been in the mid-'60s, I think. They had a lot of law enforcement guys there then, and bouncers. They had some big, heavy-duty guys that if you got out of line, bang, you were going. Yep. Which was it should be. But it was a great place to go. But the churches had a strong influence in this area, and they were against. They run the dog racing out of Carteret by banding together. They tried to close the bingo places that were on the beach. There were 2 or 3. They tried to close that, and unsuccessfully. My mother she could smell beer on my breath 20 feet, upwind. She said, "You smell like a brewery." And you know, she didn't like it, but Dad was patient with it, and me and more, you know. She was just being what a mother should be, but, and the one thing that, by charter fishing, you had to get up early in the morning, really early. So a lot of the good times, you know, the good bands that were there, you know, I missed. I couldn't stand it. You couldn't go over there and stay till 12 o'clock and get up at 4:30. It didn't work. So I missed a lot of that.
Today is July 12th, 2017. I'm Joann Small, and my husband William and I are here with Bill Biggs and his wife Jerry as part of the Coastal Voices Project. Bill, thank you for letting us visit again today. You've told us a lot about your deep Dare County roots. One of your friends told me to ask you about Warden Doe and Miss May.
That, that had to come from some of the halls, I think. I don't know if it's anything you could publish. I can give you a watered down version. You might want to edit it. But let me just give you a watered down version. There was an old man that was one of the original shad boat builders who was quite a character. Lived up near Fort Raleigh, right next to Fort Raleigh, the theater. Named Otis Doe. He was Warden's daddy. He's renowned for his wit. Not only his boat building, but his wit. And he was a craftsman, really good carpenter. And there was a rich lady that I don't wish to name because, but it was a very rich lady that was very prim and proper, and one of the first to build a nice house over Nags Head, the old Nags Head, one of the original. And she had employed Otis to build her two outdoor privies, and she wanted them built out of the best of wood, which was juniper, and it was a cedar, and she said, and I want them to be built so they don't really smell bad. And she left him alone, and he built the two toilets, and she contacted him the end of the season and said, "I'm not pleased with these toilets because they smell." So Otis said, "Well, I'll go over on the catch and take the boat over and I'll check them out." And he went into the toilets and lifted the lid on the one, and then went in and lifted on the other. And he said, "Well, I guess they do smell. You've let somebody blank in them." So if you could use so that was the type humor that went around, and you would hear they picked on that old lady because she was rich and prim and proper, and I have no idea how much truth there was to it. It was one of those things that was passed on. It was funny. I mean, if you could use the you think about
What
it.
about hurricane stories?
They were bad hurricanes, as is now, but the worst hurricanes of my life, the first one I remember, I think, was the worst one, was 44. And I can remember seeing trees fall and the house shaking, and they wouldn't let us stand near the windows. And it was during the time that Dad and Uncle, both my uncles and Dad, were at the airport working out there, and they were very concerned that I remember they came to check on us and they had to cut the trees. They were in something they call a command car. It was probably 4-wheel drive. They'd been able to go around a lot of the debris to make sure everything was all right. I can remember that as with most hurricanes, the electricity would go out over on the island for a pretty good while. They had to run the electrical plant on Roanoke Island. They had a old motor out of a big Lathrop motor out of a boat that was the power plant, and the ferry was owned it and operated it, and there were 2 or 3 service guys that did the whole island, linemen. So after a hurricane, the thing that sticks out in my mind, and particularly was the time that you were without electricity, and they'd go to the ice plant and get these big chunks of ice, try to keep them everything, and you spoil it. They had everybody had a pitcher pump with a shallow well so you could get water. So, and I remember after the 44 storm, all the trees that were dying, and they had to hire people to come. They had cross-cut saws and clean it up. But then the next one, the one I really remember, was Donna, and it didn't have the wind. The wind in the 44. Let me back up. They told us that the wind in 1944 hurricane blew the anemometer off of the hangar right at the air base at a gust of 144 knots. There was an army base next door to it, and believe it or not, it used to be the CC camp, and the North Carolina National Guard was using it. They had army troops there. They had a water tower, and that thing blew the water tower over that 44 hurricane. I remember going and looking at the water tower. There was a brand new gym at the Manteo High School that blew the roof off of that. It was some terracotta shingles or something. It blew them all over everything, but it did a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. But the highest tide, and the one I remember real, was Donna, and I want to say that was in 60. I get the dates of Ash Wednesday and Donna mixed up, but I'm going to say 60. And it blew all night. The eye came right across the house. We walked out in the yard during the eye. And when it shifted northwest, I thought the house was going to blow away. Right after daybreak, Dad went down to Manteo. That was his normal morning thing, to go down and look around. And he came back and said, "I've got to get my boots. The water is all the way up to the cemetery," which nobody had ever remembered seeing the water that high. And he went over his boots, went down, made a mark on it was a service station in downtown Manteo, which is where the Green Dolphin is now. And he made a mark on it. Took something and marked it on the wall. And it was nearly about, it was up to him standing there. What he looks like he wouldn't have been down there walking around, but he was trying to help. There were other people down there in skiffs. They were trying to help, see if there was anybody stranded. But that water, if you're familiar, you are familiar with Manteo, the water actually came up as far as the Times Printing Company. Wow. And that nobody's seen the water that high. I guess since it's been some pretty high ones now. I think probably that what's happened on that tide, I was forecast by. I think the closing of these inlets had a lot to do with it. When there's nowhere for the water to run, and I don't know if it's a rise in sea water or actually they're seeing higher tides in Wanchese and Manteo now over less wind. Don't know if it. My opinion is because that inlet's closed up and the water it takes a while to run out. No. Used to be a big inlet. I started on the bridge as first crew to work on the Oregon Inlet Bridge, and at the beginning of the bridge was what they called the Northwest. It was 60 feet of water that ran out of that channel. And it was water, but the inlet was, a lot of water could run out of it. It was a big inlet. Now it's a little more than a drain. And I understand that's happening in Hatteras too. So when that, it's like a big bathtub. You put enough wind on it, the water will rush on one end of it. And when the northwest winds, it all banks down there and there's nowhere for it to go but up. So that's my opinion on that. But the hurricanes it was the tide that did damage. I've only known of one person drowned. No, I'm wrong. It's a guy named Chuck Warren drowned in '44. He was a close friend with my dad. He and his wife Isabel Warren was, I guess, my mother's best friend. He went to check on a boat, a skiff that he had tied up, and he went. The water caught him and he drowned. And then in Donna, the one I was just talking about, that the tide came up so high, there were some Coast Guardsmen that were trying to get back to their ship in Portsmouth. And they got as far as the little bridge, and that water, a wall of water came across there when it shifted. They were, during the eye of the storm, they were there. And rather than, they tried to, one of them remained and got back on the other bridge, the big bridge, and he's the only survivor. The three of them drowned, and they got in one of the cottages that was built on the causeway, and the cottage went in the sand, which normally shallow out there, but they all drowned, and that was a bad sign tide, bad storm. I think so 4 people I know have drowned during hurricanes in all this time, but the sign tide was what we always had to worry about. The biggest sea tide, worst damage and money, was Ash Wednesday storm, which I think was in 62. Yeah. And I can remember going there looking at that and seeing waves, sea waves come clean across our Jeanette's Pier, come all the way across, and by then they had built the bypass. And some of the wave action would actually break against that road. There was a guy named Arnold Tolson, I'll never forget, coming out with a skiff with some people in it. He lived inside Nags Head on a ground level cottage, and he had some of his family in that skiff, was pulling them up, and we carried a couple of them to Manteo. It was a bad time. But that was not even a hurricane. That was some kind of a freak northeaster. But hurricanes have been, you'll always, if you're here, you're going to have to put up with them. But people, I don't think, see, when you stop and think about the times on the Outer Banks, they were built around deep water docks where freight, mail could come in. And they were all low land. Manteo was built very on low land. Wanchese is low. Stumpy Point, all those places were built on the lowest of the land because that happened to be where they could have deep water access and docks. And so one good thing about where I grew up on the north end of the island, it was the highest part. We never had to worry about the tide. And that's one reason I'm on this hill here now. I made up my mind never to live low. Never live in those low. Kitty Hawk floods, you know that?
Yeah.
Sign water comes up over, I'm going to say probably 80% of it. Collington goes underwater. Manteo, the whole time goes underwater.
Yep.
But hurricanes have always been, the electricity, it was just a way of life back there. I can remember another hurricane named Carol that did a lot of damage, and for some reason the electricity stayed out about a week during that one, and I was in the 8th grade, I think, 7th or 8th grade, but they had that little private electrical company, and that was it, and they could get the motor going and get the generator going, but the lines, it had 3 guys doing the whole island. And they worked day and night. There's a guy named Raymond Westcott, a guy named White, and a guy named, they called Squirrely Green, that worked day and night on those lines, getting them back. But it was tough living. And I can remember always after the hurricanes, mosquitoes were horrible. Horrible, I mean, like, you wouldn't believe it.
I can remember that now.
But I mean, everybody sort of pulled together on that stuff. I can remember going down to Manteo, and everybody there were 2 clothing stores, real nice stores down there, Davis the Davis family, which was the Buddy Davis daddy and uncle and granddaddy. And then the Tommy Daniels daddy, Mr. Monsey, and I can remember, and the Farrens had the stores. They'd all put their stock up high. Okay, and even at that, sometimes they lose a lot of it. But they'd go in the Pioneer Theater. Everybody had their places open. Somehow they kept going. They kept it going.
Oh.
And but it was tough. I don't remember any any bad shipwrecks due to it or anything of that nature, that magnitude. Just sign tides mostly.
Earlier you mentioned you knew H.P. Williams.
I was in court a couple of times when the H.P. Williams was a prosecuting attorney, but I met his daddy at Avon one time, and we sat down there and talked for a while, and he told me some interesting things. He was actually kin to some of my neighbors who had moved up to an area they called Little Kinnikee, which was they had moved up there after the '44 storm. They'd all lost their homes during that storm, and it turned out he was kin to some of them, and he found out that I was really good friends with one of his sisters, or two or three of them. They were my mama's best friends, and so he opened up a little bit and told me some stories, and some interesting stories. He was a fine man. And the one story he related was he remembered that his daddy was preacher of the Methodist Church in Manteo, and they decided to move back to Avon, and they set sail in a shad boat, I believe he said, and the wind fell out, and the only thing they had to eat was salt herrings, and his mother had packed a couple of mason jars full of water, and the water ran out real soon after they left. They ate those herrings, and they were out in a dead calm sign with nothing to drink, and only had made it past Oregon Inlet, and they shoved. They had a long shoving pole, and they started shoving, and finally, after dark, the wind breezed up a little bit, and they got down there, and the folks at Avon, they were overdue, but they built a big bonfire on the shore, and they steered into that fire. And it took, and he was telling me about it in detail how miserable that was, and you could almost feel like it would make you thirsty just listening to him tell it. But he was quite proud of his son. He's a nice old man, yeah.
Was there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't asked you about, but you think we'd like to hear?
I could go on all day and talk about trivia, but in generally, I'd say that I had I'd do it again. I had a pretty good life in Manteo. I think if I had to do it over again, I'd do less hunting, a little more learning, a little more school. It would probably cost me a little bit, but no, it's been some mighty dear souls that helped me get through, and there were some good people, and I will say that it's not a bad place to live now. I think Dare County, I think we're all doing pretty good now, but it's changed. It was a wild, desolate area. There was just nobody living here when I grew up, and now it's, when I go out here in this traffic, I can't help but think back, one more story, and that will show you how much the traffic, speaking of the traffic, Billy Bryan and myself were dating some girls in Kitty Hawk, okay? And it was in '58. I was a senior, and this bypass road was not here, just the ocean road. And a guy named Byron Sawyer came up here one time with us, and I had Daddy's car, and we'd all band together, come up together. He said, "You got a good safe speed to drive down this beach of a night on the way back home. There's no traffic. You can drive 60 easy." Think about going on the beach road driving 60 back to Manteo. See, there was just hotels. I used to know the name of the hotels. You might remember that, those big old hotels. The Carolinian was the newest one, but there was the Parkinson, the Croatan, the one that the Haymans owned. I can't remember the name of that, but between those hotels, there was very few houses.
Yep.
Just wide open beach. So it's going for that, what we have now. But I've seen a lot of change.
And you've had a lot of happiness.
Oh yeah. I have. I've enjoyed it, and I still go inside. And now that I was telling Bill that now that since I retired in '95, I had more time to hunt and fish. But there's nothing to hunt and fish for. But I enjoy it.
Thank you, Bill.